Imagine Amsterdam in the early 1600s. Bustling canals inspire a nation of merchants eager for fortune. Into this world steps the VOC, granted a 21-year monopoly on Dutch trade to the East Indies, effectively nationalizing profit and risk. With exclusive rights from the Cape of Good Hope to the Straits of Magellan, it could build forts, maintain armies, and even administer justice, powers no modern corporation would dare claim. By 1637, VOC shares traded on the Amsterdam Exchange, attracting investors with dividends as high as 40%. It was the birth of modern finance, joint stock investment, secondary markets, and limited liability. The VOC's merchant soldiers enforced its spice monopoly, contracting local rulers across Java and the Maluku Islands. Their influence extended beyond commerce. They introduced European technology to Asia, from fortifications in Ceylon to trade outlets in Japan at Dejima. Though not immune to conflict, the VOC clashed with Ming forces at Penghu in 1623 and again in Liaoluo Bay in 1633. It maintained dominance through savvy diplomacy and overwhelming naval firepower. Yet beneath the veneer of success lay strains. 6 semi-autonomous chambers in the Netherlands, complicated administration and bookkeeping, siphoning resources into internal bureaucracy, even as wartime costs ballooned. Nonetheless, between 1602 and 1796, the VOC dispatched nearly 4,800 ships and moved over 2.5 million tons of cargo, dwarfing the combined efforts of its rivals, England, Portugal, and Spain, and cementing its role as Europe's largest commercial and colonial power in 17th century Asia. Before we peer into the timbers of the ill-fated Batavia, let us meet the very souls aboard her decks. 341 men, women, and children bound for the Spice Islands under 2 vastly different leaders. At its helm stood Francisco Pelsayet, a seasoned merchant commander whose judgment would soon be tested by treachery and hardship. Steering daily operations was Arjen Jacobs, a skilled skipper whose bold seamanship masked a reckless streak and brewing resentment toward Pelsayet. Together, their uneasy alliance would shape the fortunes of every soul aboard and sow the seeds of mutiny that followed the wreck. Crew and passengers, they numbered 341 souls, hardened sailors, armed soldiers, shrewd merchants, and even families, wives and children who dared the 6-month ocean crossing for a brighter future in the Indies. When the Batavia struck the treacherous reefs off the Houtman Abrolhos on June 4, 1629, roughly 300 survivors clambered onto the barren isles. 40 went down with the ship's final groans. Isolated under a blazing sun, with scant fresh water and dwindling food, the disparate group looked to their leaders for hope, and found only tension. Commander Francisco Pelsayet. Francisco Pelsayet held the title of Commandeur and Upper Koopman, senior merchant and fleet commander, entrusted by the VOC to bring home a fortune in spices. Known for his meticulous journals, Pelsayet was methodical and strict. He recorded every detail from sea illness to the exact latitude when they wrecked, preserving the story for posterity. Yet beneath his calm professionalism lay a man unwell. By the time of the wreck, he was feverish, his authority undermined by illness and by the simmering animosity of his skipper. Arjen Jacobs, appointed skipper for his navigational prowess, was no stranger to long voyages, having plied the Indian Ocean on earlier VOC expeditions. But his skill came hand in hand with recklessness. He was accused of deliberately misreading the sun's position after the Cape of Good Hope, steering the Batavia off course and deeper into danger. More damning was his fractured bond with Pelsayet, born of a public dressing down in Surat, which would later fuel whispers of conspiracy, long before the ship met her doom. Together, Pelsayet's cautious commerce and Jacobs's audacious seamanship set the stage for triumph and ultimately for tragedy. Their clash of personalities, inextricable from the fate of every man, woman, and child aboard the Batavia, would echo through history as the prelude to one of the bloodiest mutinies ever recorded. Before the hull of the Batavia ever cracked upon coral, her voyage was already set against a backdrop of ambition and discord. In October 1628, the newly launched ship slipped out of Texel under the authority of the VOC, bound for the Spice Islands via the time-honored Cape Route. Yet beneath the veneer of commerce, rivalries simmered between the fleet's merchant commander and her intrepid skipper, and in the shadows lurked a disillusioned under-merchant nursing radical convictions. Months later, on the night of 4th June 1629, those tensions and ambitions would culminate in catastrophe as the Batavia struck the reefs of the Houtman Abrolhos, casting over 180 survivors onto barren islets, where a new drama of survival and betrayal would unfold. On 29 October 1628, as dawn painted the Dutch coastline in pale gold, the Batavia hoisted anchor off Texel, her sails filling with brisk northwesterly winds, and her decks crowded by 341 souls, eager for fortune in the East Indies. Under orders to follow the Brouwer route, the Batavia steamed southward toward the Cape of Good Hope, exploiting the mighty roaring forties to hasten her eastward passage, yet inviting navigational peril for any delayed turn toward Java. After replenishing victuals and water at the Cape, the flagship would have plotted a course due north for Batavia town, the VOC's fortified spice depot on Java, where silks, silver, and small arms would be exchanged for precious cloves and nutmeg. From the earliest days at sea, Francisco Pelsaert and Arjen Jacobs locked horns over command. Pelsaert's meticulous logging and strict discipline grated against Jacobs's bold maneuvering, and the skipper's alleged negligence, later blamed for course errors, only deepened their mutual distrust. By the time the fleet scattered in a storm off the Cape, whispers of insubordination swirled as officers took sides, leaving the Batavia alone and ripe for conflict. Third in rank, Geronimus Cornelis arrived aboard the Batavia, with debts shadowing his reputation. Once a prosperous apothecary, he now nursed bankrupt ruin and unorthodox beliefs that set him apart from the rigid hierarchies of the VOC. Known among fellow passengers for radical, even Gnostic-tinged ideas about divinity and the laws of man, Cornelis observed the Pelsaert-Jacobs feud with opportunistic eyes, plotting a darker enterprise beneath the guise of commercial enterprise. On the moonless night of the 4th of June, 1629, the Batavia's hull ground violently upon the treacherous morning reef in the Abrolhos archipelago, her timbers splintering under the weight of betrayal and miscalculation. When morning's light revealed the sea's cruel embrace, over 180 survivors, among them women and children, had clambered onto Beacon Island, clutching what few supplies and memories of order remained. Cut off from the world and from any hope of swift rescue, the disparate group faced not only the elements, but the lurking ambition of those who would seize power in the void left by their absent commander and skipper. With sea spray in their hair and tension in every glance, the wrecked Batavia's survivors now awaited either salvation or a descent into mutiny and massacre. Before the first blow of mutiny was struck, the Batavia's castaways found themselves leaderless, with their appointed commander and skipper rowing away in search of rescue. A vacuum of power yawned beneath the blistering sun, only to be filled by a man whose descent into madness would stain these coral islets forever. Geronimus Cornelis, once a bankrupt apothecary turned under-merchant, seized the moment to crown himself Captain General, marshalling weapons and rations in preparation to hijack the rescue vessel. What followed was a reign of terror. Systematic killings of over 120 men, women and children, and horrors of sexual slavery and torture that eclipsed even the brutality of the sea. Across 3 brutal acts, usurpation of authority, calculated genocide, and unspeakable atrocities, this chapter reveals how thin the veneer of civilization can be when desperation and ambition collide. On 17th of June, 1629, merely days after the wreck, Francisco Pelsaert and skipper Arjen Jacobs launched the ship's longboat with a handful of men and scant provisions, determined to seek aid from Batavia town over 1,500 nautical miles away. Their departure left Geronimus Cornelis, the under-merchant third in command, as the highest-ranking VOC official among the more than 180 survivors stranded on Beacon Island and its barren neighbors. In relinquishing the sea in hopes of salvation, Pelsaert and Jacobs inadvertently handed Cornelis both the keys to the arms locker and the leverage to control every barrel of water and biscuit on shore. Almost immediately, Cornelis proclaimed himself Captain General of the survivors, donning borrowed finery and issuing orders as though the wreck had been a mere prelude to his command. He consolidated all firearms and edged out rival claimants, most notably the ship's minister, by accusing them of insubordination and secretly dispatching loyalists to isolate any threats on surrounding islets. With cruel efficiency, Cornelis and his select band orchestrated a purge, systematically murdering over 120 unarmed survivors, drowning some in nearby channels, strangling others in their hammocks, and hacking still more to pieces on the sand. These killings, rationalized as necessary to conserve dwindling resources and secure power, turned the coral atolls into mass graves, the echo of cries swallowed by the indifferent sea. 7 women were seized as sex slaves, their fates dictated by Cornelis's whims. Among them was Lucretia Jansdochter, whom he reserved for himself, demanding her submission under threat of death. Beyond physical violence, Cornelis staged mock trials, forcing survivors to confess imaginary crimes at knife point, then meting out summary punishment through drowning or dismemberment to terrorize any who might resist. Eyewitness accounts recorded victims begged for mercy beneath a blood-red sky, only to hear Cornelis proclaim, "God has ordained this cleansing," as the waters ran crimson. In the absence of lawful command, Cornelis's brutal rule transformed the hope of rescue into a theater of horror, one that would only end when Francisco Pelsaert's return unleashed Voki justice upon these unholy acts. In the desolate expanse of the Houtman Abrolhos, where the sea meets the sky in an endless horizon, a tale of resilience and defiance unfolded amidst the aftermath of the Batavia shipwreck. Amidst the chaos and tyranny that ensued, a beacon of hope emerged in the form of Wiebbe Hayes, a soldier whose leadership and courage would etch his name into history. In the wake of the Batavia's wreck in June 1629, Geronimus Cornelis, seeking to consolidate his power, dispatched a group of soldiers, including Wiebbe Hayes, to West Wallaby Island under the pretense of searching for water. Unbeknownst to them, this was a calculated move by Cornelis to eliminate potential threats to his authority, expecting the men to perish from thirst and starvation. Contrary to Cornelis's expectations, Hayes and his men discovered fresh water on East Wallaby Island and an abundance of food sources, including wallabies. Recognizing the looming threat posed by Cornelis, Hayes organized the construction of defensive structures using coral and limestone, creating what is now known as the Wiebbe Hayes Stone Fort, the oldest surviving European building in Australia. With makeshift weapons and strategic planning, Hayes prepared his men to defend against the impending assaults. Cornelis, alarmed by Hayes's survival and fortifications, launched multiple attacks against the soldiers on West Wallaby Island. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Hayes and his men repelled the assaults, leveraging their superior training and defensive positions. In a desperate attempt to negotiate, Cornelis approached Hayes under a flag of truce, but was swiftly captured along with several of his followers. Following Cornelis's capture, his remaining followers, led by Wouter Loos, mounted a final assault on Hayes's fortifications. The battle reached its climax just as the rescue ship, Sardam, appeared on the horizon. Both factions raced to reach the ship first, but Hayes succeeded in informing Commander Pelsaert of the mutiny and atrocities committed. Consequently, the mutineers were apprehended and justice was served. Wiebbe Hayes's unwavering resolve and strategic acumen not only thwarted the mutineers' plans, but also ensured the survival of many innocent lives. His actions stand as a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity, carving a legacy that endures in the annals of maritime history.